Good evening. I'm Jeff Spence from the Office of Alumni Relations at Thomas Jefferson University, and welcome to tonight's discussion. Tonight, we will learn about the science behind preserving textiles while exploring the university's textile and costume collection with Curator and Adjunct Professor Jade Papa. Throughout tonight's talk, we invite you to share any questions you have by using the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen or in the Zoom app. If you don't see the button, try moving your cursor and it should appear. And now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Jade Papa. Jade is a costume and textile historian and brings her extensive experience in object preservation, identification, and research to her position as curator of the Textile and Costume Collection, housed in the Design Center at Jefferson's East Falls campus. She has contributed to a number of books, journals, and magazines, and is an experienced lecturer who brings with her an intense curiosity about how objects are shaped and were shaped by the people and cultures who wore the garments and created the textiles. Jade, thank you for joining us this evening. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And hello to everyone. I'm going to keep my camera off until we do the question and answer portion of tonight's event, but I will share my screen with you. So bear with me a moment while I get all of that set up. Thank you all for joining me. It is, to see that map in the slideshow that said, where you were all joining from. It's great to see such a variety of people from across the country and as I understand, across the world. So thank you all for being here. So I'm just going to jump right in because Jeff gave me such a nice introduction, and hopefully everybody can see my slides. If not, I'm counting on Jeff to let me know that. So across the street from the main campus of Thomas Jefferson in East Falls sits a building on the edge of scenic Wissahickon Valley Park. The Design Center, which houses the Textile and Costume Collection, is bursting, literally bursting, with objects that serve as a veritable treasure trove of inspiration to aspiring designers and a wealth of primary material for researchers. What's so special, one of the things that's so special about these objects, is that they also capture within their woven pattern or construction the stories of the lives of individuals. Maybe no other material is as personal to us as the cloth we wear on our bodies. Clothing has that ability to hold memory. These objects tell the stories of the economic boom brought on by the textile manufacturing in the Philadelphia region in the 18th and 19th century. The cut of a dress marks the superb talent of one of the most prominent fashion designers of the 20th century. And stories of a people and their history are told through mud-painted motifs and figures on an African textile. We hold on to clothing to capture these stories for subsequent generations. But it's not just museums that do this. All of us can probably think of important pieces that have been passed down through the family that evoke a moment in time or a particular memory of an individual. So today, I'd like to welcome you through the doors of the Design Center for a little behind the scenes look at the treasures held there. Caring for and preserving a historic collection of this sort has its challenges. And so today, you'll peer over my shoulder as I make the rounds through the building and talk to you about how we work to ensure that these objects are around to inspire future generations. We'll talk about the practical aspects of preserving a collection, but also pause to admire a few of our prized objects with interesting stories. And hopefully along the way, you'll pick up a few tips and tricks you can apply when it comes to caring for textiles and clothing in your collection, so your memories can continue to be passed down. So today we're going to discuss three main factors when thinking about your own keepsakes: environment, handling, and storage. So a little bit of background about that building I was just telling you about that you can see in the upper left-hand corner of the screen here. So our building began its life as a private residence. Architect Earl Bolton Jr. built this amazing California ranch style home in 1955 for various members of the Paley and Levy families. You might recognize these names from their connection to Bill Paley, who is of CBS fame. The building was originally called the Goldie Paley Design Center in honor of Bill's mother. The building was donated to the university in the late 1970s, and from that point on, it became the official repository for the collection of textiles and clothing that had been amassing on campus kind of here and there since the school was founded in 1884. And it was at this point, when we got a building, that donations from outside the university began to pour in. These donations, combined with the materials the university already held, swelled the number of objects in the collection. Although still deep in the inventory process, that's what I've been doing, I think, for much of the 4 years that I've been there. Our best guess right now is that we house about 50 to 100,000 objects, which is an extraordinarily high number. One of the things that makes our collection unique is that it's a study collection, meaning that more than being focused on exhibitions, we are an active collection utilized by students, faculty, and researchers. And I use the objects in my history of costume and 20th century designers courses to demonstrate what I would otherwise just have to show in 2 dimensions on the screen. So, when you walk into the front door of the design center and see the marble floored entry hall of the building, you will know right away that this amazing and unconventional space was never meant to house a textile and costume collection. And so there are a certain amount of challenges that we have to deal with in being in this building. So we've learned to adapt. We house objects here, there, and everywhere in the building. Spare bedrooms, spare bathrooms, they've all become storage areas. For example, in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you can see a fraction of the shoes that we hold in our collection, and we actually hold them in Goldie's shoe closet, which is located in her, what was formerly her master bathroom to the house. So, when you are thinking about the preservation environment that you want to create for your objects, ideally, you want to pick a cool, dark, dry, and largely undisturbed space. And you want to have the ability to control air and heat flow, because those are the kinds of things that are going to allow you to slow down that deterioration process. This can be a bit of a challenge for us in our building because we still have our original heating system. Textiles, clothing enjoy consistency and temperatures that stay around 65 to 75 degrees. So basically anywhere you would be comfortable in your home, that's clothing's going to be comfortable there. But, you know, if you do have great grandma's dress in your unfinished attic, you might consider bringing it downstairs. High temperatures will speed up the rate of many of the chemical reactions and as a result, speed up the rate at which the damage can occur in fibers, dyes, and other component materials of textiles. If anything, it's actually better to have cooler temperatures than high temperatures. Relative humidity is an incredibly important data point to keep in mind when you're thinking about caring for textiles and costumes. Ideally, the relative humidity in your space stays within a range of 45 to 55%. Because of the size of some of the objects and the sheer amount of things that we have to store, it's unfortunately necessary for us to house some of the pieces in the basement. And you can see on the racks here really long rolled textiles, which we just don't have space for in any other part of our building. At least they're out of direct sunlight, but the basement is another area that I'd steer you away from for storing your textiles in. In the spring months, we largely rely on dehumidifiers to control the moisture levels in our basement. So I've spoken a lot about textiles and clothing, but the truth of the matter is we have objects made out of a number of different materials, and they're often mixed in one item, and they can all be adversely affected by high humidity. When humidity is low, paper, parchment, leather, they lose moisture and shrink. And in high humidity, they gain moisture and expand, but they won't necessarily return to their original dimensions when that humidity is dropped. So in this slide, on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see all of these enormous books nestled into individual shelves. And some of these books are absolutely massive, like 8 inches thick, 20 inches from top to bottom. When we have to move these, it's a fantastic workout. We have 119 of these swatch books. They were produced by textile manufacturers. And the page that you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen is from a book that was created by the Lorraine Manufacturing Company. And these books and the pages within them serve to record the types of fabric that that manufacturer could produce. So when we look at the pages now, one sees row upon row of the most extraordinary fabrics, many of which are in styles that haven't been produced for decades. As a maker of clothing myself, it's astonishing to encounter styles of fabrics that I could never get my hands on today. These books are really an amazing snapshot of the breadth and skill of these manufacturers, which are now all unfortunately gone. So because of their size, the size of these books and the number of them that we have to store them in the basement. They're already deteriorating. Non-archival paper is crumbling, and it's a condition that's not helped by the humidity fluctuations. We try to control this as best we can through, as I mentioned, the dehumidifiers, but we also dust off the tops of books to minimize any mold growth that might be happening. I've never seen any evidence of that, but better safe than sorry. And you'll notice that some of them look like they have sort of like a plastic sheeting on them, and that's a polyester cover that's protecting the exteriors of those books and also helping to keep some of the deteriorating leather that's on their bindings from staining other books. As we've discussed, so organic materials absorb or release moisture depending on the humidity levels that surround them. And I think maybe we see this most visibly in our wooden objects. So in this pair of textile printing blocks, which are hand carved from fruit trees, clearly there are cracks visible down the center of the pattern. And obviously this occurred sometime in their life after they were used like a stamp to print repeated patterns onto yards of fabric. It wouldn't do you much good for your patterned motif to have a big crack and line running through the center of it. On the left-hand side of the screen is one of 2 pieces I'll show you today that are amongst the most valuable in terms of being historically significant to our collection. It's kind of difficult to decipher visually, but this piece is a pre-1752 French knitting frame. So in other words, it's a loom that produces knitted fabrics. And this technology dates to the 16th century. And at that time, and for a few centuries afterwards, all manner of knitted stockings and sometimes garments were made on frames like this one. We actually have a pair of men's knitted breeches from around 1770 that were made on a frame like this. So this frame was brought to America by a German man named Godfrey Miller. He was a hosiery weaver, and he brought the loom to the country, to America in 1763. So this is one of only 2 frames from this period that exist in the United States. The other is at Colonial Williamsburg. And based on the provenance told to us by Mr. Miller's ancestors who donated the frame, we know that ours was used in the Germantown area of Philadelphia by Mr. Godfrey. It is in remarkable shape, considering the fact that it's made primarily out of wood, how old it is, and again, the fact that it is stored in our basement. I've actually seen images of it in an exhibition from the late 1970s or early 1980s when it was actually in use. The two adorable little girls' dresses on this slide, which date from the mid-20th century, bring me to the next important environmental factor to consider when you're protecting your textiles: exposure to light. For the moment, I want you to focus on the dress and the apron on the left-hand side of the screen, and specifically at the shoulder, specifically at the left shoulder. Hopefully this image is large enough on whatever screen you're viewing these slides on to see the discoloration on the top of those sleeves. I think, again, it's most noticeable on the left sleeve where the light blue of the underarm area kind of fades up into this really dingy white on the top of the arm. So Joe and Leo were two of 6 Rosenau brothers who went into business making clothes for children. They started the Nanette Manufacturing Company, and you can see their sort of trademark, what their labels looked like. They started this company right here in Philadelphia. And in fact, if you know the area at all, they were located not too far from our campus on East Falls at 2800 Fox Street. We have a number of Nanette dresses in the collection, many of which are dead stock, meaning that they still have their tags but were never sold. So Joe and Leo, being astute businessmen, insisted that their dresses be hung instead of stored flat, so that the frothy little girls' frocks maintained their pert appearance. And so when I look at the damage on the shoulders of actually both of these dresses, it's apparent that it's clearly a result of light damage. They're discolored and the fabric is completely shattering. They're also, the dresses themselves in its entirety, they're absolutely filthy. So it's my theory that they were displayed near the front window of a store for a number of years and exposed to light and dust, and have come to us with these condition issues. So while having them hanging to catch a buyer's eye might have been a good strategy then, it certainly didn't work out too great in the long run. And so it is both natural and artificial light that can fade color and contribute to degradation and permanent damage. And the thing about light damage is that it's cumulative and it's never reversible. So as a general rule of thumb, keeping your heirlooms in the dark or low light as much as possible is kind of the best way to go. And if you are going to have them out, because of course we want to be able to look at them occasionally, or if you're thinking about maybe having one of your flat textiles framed, make sure your framer is using appropriate UV filtering glass. This blonde little boy's name is Dermot Chickering Murphy. And I truly believe that if you did a poll of all of those, of all of us who work in the design center, this collection of his garments, books, toys, shoes would be near the top of the list of favorite pieces that we hold. And what makes this collection quite special is that in addition to the objects, we often have pictures of him wearing these garments. You can see in both of the images on the left-hand side of the screen, these shorts that he's wearing that have this meticulous embroidered pattern of a cartoon mouse on it. And here on the right-hand side of the screen, we have one of Dermot's hats. And I'm just going to imagine here that when I asked the question, can you guess what fiber this hat is made out of? You said wool. Maybe you said this because you thought, well, the purpose of a hat is to keep the head warm and wool would make sense. But maybe you said this because your keen eye caught sight of a white speck on the dark background like my eye did. and you said, that's the remnant of a clothing moth cocoon, and they like to eat wool. Either way, you would be right. So well done. Wool is one of the clothing moth's favorite meals to eat, and I regularly check our wool items for pest activity. These little critters can do a huge amount of damage. And although it's more often the adults, the flying moths, that are seen, it is when the pest is in its larval stage. This is all kind of gross if you're creeped out by bugs, but it's when they're in their larval stage that they do the most serious damage. So for the clothes moth, the larval stage will last between 2 months in a warm or humid environment and 6 months in a cooler climate. And again, it's in this phase where they're feasting on the material of your object so they can grow fat and spin their cocoon and hatch and then start this growth process all over again. And so that white casing is evidence of the cocoons after the moths have emerged. And I've tried to sort of like zero you in here with my yellow circle and the arrows pointing to some of that. Other, even grosser, evidence of pest and infestation is frass, which is small, hard black specks that look like dirt you'll find around an object that's infested. Frass is just a really nice way of, or a nicer way of saying insect droppings. So while thankfully not as common in our collection, there are other pests you have to watch out for. You should be on the lookout for black carpet beetles, silverfish. Silverfish especially like paper, so keep an eye out for them around your paper materials. So I've talked to you about these pests. What can you do to prevent these infestations? And the good news is that general housekeeping, general good housekeeping goes a long way. So you want to make sure you're doing lots of vacuuming and that you check on your pieces about every 6 months. Pests like environments where they are undisturbed by human activity. You also want to, again, keep an eye on that humidity as moths thrive in higher humidity. So using moth traps, cedar blocks, and lavender to repel the pests or catch them will help, but they won't catch enough of the adults to solve the problem. Remember, and if you use these, remember not to put them next to your garments or textiles, as the oils inherent to these treatment methods can stain. And so current IPM, or what we call integrated pest management guidelines, advocate for non-chemical interventions. And these guidelines dissuade people from using mothballs, which are carcinogenic to people anyway. So if you're really having a pest problem, you might actually consider using your chest freezer in your house to get the bugs and clear up your infestation, right? We have a chest freezer that's sole purpose is for dealing with objects that have been infested. An infested object kept at -5 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 weeks will kill all of those stages of the insect's life cycle. So there are a couple of really important things to keep in mind if you're considering freezing. Never freeze objects that are made up of lacquerware or ivory, wood, an object containing ivory, any objects that you might have that are under tension, or composite objects that contain inorganic materials like glass, high-fired ceramics, metal. And then also you want to make sure that you're using a freezer without an auto defrost, as you don't want it to cycle between warmer and cooler temperatures, as this won't sufficiently get rid of all the pests. So to prepare, don't just dump your textile into the freezer without doing anything else, right? So to prepare your object, you want to wrap it in archival tissue paper. And we're going to talk more about tissue paper in just a moment. Place it in a box, preferably also archival, and you want to seal the entire bundle in an airtight polyethylene bag. So these bags are like basically Ziploc bags. We like to use those big storage bags you put under your bed and then you use the vacuum to suck the air out of those to save space. Those are great, right? So if you can't use one of those, if you can't vacuum out your bag, you just want to gently push as much air out of that bag as possible and then seal it up. What you're really trying to do with that is to get all of the air out, any possible water vapor that's in there. We don't want it to condense. So while you're waiting for the 2 weeks to pass, don't open up the freezer to check on the objects. Again, you want to make sure this temperature is staying constant. And then when the time is up, be careful, be gentle with the packages as you're lifting them out of the freezer. They're even more fragile at this point. You want to set up your box in an area with good air circulation, and don't do anything with it for about 24 hours. You want everything to kind of come back up to room temperature. So ideally, after you take your item out of the box, you're vacuuming it to remove all of those traces of pest infestation. Remnants of old infestation could attract new bugs, and we certainly don't want to have to start this cycle all over again. So when you're vacuuming your objects, you maybe want to consider something that's not your regular vacuum nozzle, but the kind of attachment you might get to clean your keyboard, which is what you can see being demonstrated on the right-hand side of the screen. It's just like a smaller brush. And if possible, you want to like lower your suction setting. And if, all else fails, having a brush like is being shown on the left-hand side of the screen to sort of like sweep, encourage those pest, things into the nozzle of your vacuum cleaner might be a good suggestion if you don't have any other adaptations that you're making. So now we're on to sort of like the handling portion of our discussion tonight. So frozen or not, textiles are frequently more fragile than they first appear. So ultimately, you want to handle them as little as possible and provide them the support they need when they're stored away. So there's a lot of discussion these days regarding the handling of objects. And the thinking behind wearing cotton gloves has evolved a lot over the years. And now best museum practices suggest that clean hands in many solutions is best. So clean hands means freshly washed. We want to cut down on the oils from our skin or lotions that we might have that would react with the fibers of the textile or garment. So clean hands allow us a nice tactile feedback, and we can do things more safely, like button a button or zip up a zipper. But there are instances where you want to wear nitrile gloves or cloth gloves. So for example, if you're handling objects that are made out of leather or metal, wear your gloves. And we always wear gloves if we're dealing with dangerous materials to protect ourselves. So for example, if anything has mold or we suspect something to have mold, we would wear gloves, and actually we'd also wear a mask as well. So one thing that is undisputed is the use of archival or conservation quality materials to store your pieces. So archival refers to materials that are physically durable and chemically stable. They are inert, as they do not release degradation products that could be harmful to the object. So we use tissue paper on an almost daily basis in the textile and costume collection for a myriad of reasons, and it comes into direct contact, in fact, with our objects. So making sure it's of the best archival quality is important. And you can see a couple examples of tissue paper. You'll see a few more in the slides to come in the upper right-hand corner where the woman is cutting the archival tube. All of this blue board you're seeing is all of that archival material. So when it comes to shopping for archival tissue paper, you'll run into two terms, buffered and unbuffered. Buffered means that an alkaline substance has been added as an alkaline reserve or buffer to counteract any acids that might form in the material in the future. So cellulose fibers like cotton, flax, linen, jute, they are the types that benefit from being stored in buffered tissue paper. Protein materials, on the other hand, like wool and silk, do better in unbuffered tissue paper. And so here's the rub, that if you're trying to choose between the two, you might have a garment that's made out of both protein and cellulose type fibers. Or maybe you have no idea what the fiber content of that textile or garment is anyway. So save yourself the risk and just use unbuffered tissue paper. It is just fine for all of these types of materials, and we use unbuffered tissue paper almost exclusively at the Design Center. So the next step is to find the appropriate container for these objects. So you might have a plastic tub hanging around that you think would work well. It's sealed, it would maybe keep the bugs out, right? But I would dissuade you from using one of those plastic containers, right? The fibers that garments are made out of, that your textiles are made out of, they need to breathe. And that's something that plastics just don't allow for. Plastics also have the tendency to off-gas, which could introduce harmful chemicals that could decrease the life of your garment. So you want to choose an acid-free box. And in terms of choosing a size, you want to choose a size that allows you to place the object in the box with the fewest number of folds possible. This orange dress that you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen is actually a full dress, and it's folded in half here with its skirt being underneath it. When I found the beautiful silk brocade dress from the mid-19th century on the left-hand side of the screen, it was stuffed into a box and folded in half lengthwise at about waist level. And because of the age of this, because of the fiber, this was putting a lot of stress on a delicate fabric. When we have textiles that are folded, they tend to, over time, break. The fabric just sort of splits along those fold lines. And I've seen far too many examples of the damage that's done by just having too small of boxes. So I am happy to report that the dress is now in a box where it doesn't have to be folded in half at all, right? So before you, and I'm going to go back to the previous slide here, before you put that object into its appropriately sized box, make sure you're lining the box with tissue paper, archival tissue paper, or boil washed, unbleached cotton fabric. So boil wash means that you've laundered the cotton. We usually use muslin, but you could use an old bed sheet. So we wash it in detergent on the hottest setting, and then we run it through again a second time without detergent and again on the hottest setting. What we're really trying to do is remove any finishes that might have been put into the fabric that could be harmful to the object. So you can put more than one object, more than one thing into a box, but you kind of just want to keep tabs, don't overfill it. And if you are putting multiple objects in a box, make sure you're putting the heaviest on the bottom, the most delicate, the most fragile on top. So you've got the tissue, you've purchased the box, you've got the plan. Now how do you prepare your objects for its new home? For flat textiles, this is actually pretty easy, right? You could just interleave the tissue between the different layers of the textile so they're not coming into contact with one another. For three-dimensional garments, you want to fashion the tissue into what we in the museum world colloquially refer to as sausages, right? Which is what you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen. And you're doing this because you want to use these sausages to pad out the folds. Again, we don't want any fabric breakage, and to keep the garment from collapsing in on itself. So you can see this beautiful gown on the left-hand side of the screen is sort of like supported by those sausages. Right. You can see this quick rundown of creating a sausage on the right-hand side of the screen. I mean, you're basically just accordion folding or scrunching the tissue into this sausage-like shape, and then taking another sheet of tissue paper and wrapping it around the scrunched sausage to create this smooth surface. And then finally just tuck in or pinch the ends to keep everything in place. So place these rolls inside sleeves, at the side seams, and under heavy embellishments that might cause the garment to sag. As you can see in this late 19th century bodice, we've padded it out with rolls and almost created a body on the interior so that all of the elements are supported. The floating leather tongues of the 18th century shoes on the right-hand side of the screen are a problem because they're unsupported. And over time, gravity and the aging leather will cause these areas to become completely distorted. Right? So use additional tissue or archival bolsters, scrunch up some more of that tissue paper and kind of get it to mimic the shape of a foot. This is something that you can play around with and easily create at home. And if you have some heirlooms that are hats, think about creating some of these tissue rolls and puffs to put in the recesses of the crown of the hat in the same way. Keep in mind, right, shoes, hats, other objects might already have creases in them from wear. Don't try to force these creases out. You'll actually do more harm than good. What we're trying to prevent is damage after their lives as worn pieces. You might also consider hanging your garment. So here are a few details to keep in mind when you're considering if something can be safely hung. Don't ever hang knits or garments cut on the bias. Gravity will stretch these pieces out and create distortions that are difficult or impossible to remedy. You might actually have seen this in your own closets if you were hanging a sweater and then it gets distorted shoulders, right? Don't hang things that have a lot of heavy embellishment. And if your garment already has shoulder damage, don't hang it, right? So if you've determined that your garment can be hung, make sure you're not replicating what our closets at the Design Center used to look like. In this image on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that there are far too many garments packed into this tiny closet. When you're hanging, retain space between garments so that they aren't abrading one another. And Faye Dunaway offered some sage advice. Don't use wire hangers. First of all, over time, the metal could rust and harm the garment, but probably more damaging is that there is not enough surface area on the arms of the hanger to support the shoulders of the garment properly. Your best bet is to use hangers that are padded with archival materials. In this slide, you're seeing an event we held at the Design Center where we asked students to come in and help us replace all of the non-archival hangers that are being used in the collection. It was a great success and we had a lot of fun. My work study student is holding one of these padded hangers, and in the image next to it, you can see the students are constructing them. And absolutely no sewing is necessary for the creation of these hangers. And if you follow that link from the Philadelphia Museum of Art, you can get their tutorial, which includes the list of materials. If you don't have enough time, or if you don't catch this URL, you can also just Google Philadelphia Museum of Art padded hangers, and you can find it that way. So, in your preparations to store your items, you might have found that they are in a state that could require some TLC. So beyond just the simplest of fixes, I mean, go ahead and sew on a loose button, right? But if it's a really important piece, it's probably the best idea to call in the professionals. And that's actually true for anything and everything I've said today. When in doubt, consult an expert. And so to find a reputable conservator, you might consult the American Institute for Conservation, whose web address you can see at the bottom of the page here. We don't have a conservator on staff at the collection, and one object I would undoubtedly reach out to a conservator about is the quilt that you see here. So this is as promised, this is the second of the stars of the textile and costume collection that I alluded to earlier. So the maker of the block at the center of this quilt, which features the urn holding flowers surrounded by birds, the maker was invited to Philadelphia by Benjamin Franklin in 1773. John Hewson was an Englishman who had been trained to produce the highest quality block printed textiles in London. And he traveled to the colonies and set up a calico printing manufactory in Kensington, right? And it was the first of its kind in this not yet country. Right? He quickly gained fame for his flowered dress goods and printed coverlets, and for panels like the one you see at the center of this quilt. His panels were printed in stages with different blocks, actually similar to the ones that we saw earlier at the beginning of the presentation, but certain colors were hand painted in. And if you're really maybe intrigued by this or interested by this, there's an excellent article which you'll see noted at the top of the screen, The Man of Many Vases, John Hewson Calico Printer. And in this article, the author notes that there, at that point when she was writing it, only 28 textiles displaying Hewson printing have been documented. And of those, 10 are quilts, and we have one of them. So it's really fantastic. Our quilt was discovered in a heap on top of a file cabinet at Craftex Mills, which was a furnishings and fabric design and weaving mill in Philadelphia. And so this might explain some of the stains it's earned, right? And conservators with their extensive training in chemistry could help us identify the origin of some of these stains and if they could be safely removed without harming the textile. So I know our time is running short, and so I'll just close by saying that I've really enjoyed sharing some of these pieces of the textile and costume collections with you. And I hope, although it's been very much a whirlwind dive into the world of preservation, you've learned a few things for your home collections. So in addition to using these tips to safeguard your objects, I'll also encourage you to take the time to enjoy these heirlooms and to tell their stories. You're holding on to important history. And if I could leave you with just one final tip, I'd encourage you to find a way to record the stories that accompany these objects. I've shown you a number of things today that have strong provenance, but for every one of these examples, we have 10 others that we know absolutely nothing about. So let's make sure we're taking just as much care in preserving those stories as we are the objects that evoke the memories. Thank you very much. This final slide has a little bit of information about how you can find us, and if you'd like to sign up for updates, you can see the address at the bottom of the screen. We'd love to stay in contact with you. All right, Jeff, I'm gonna turn it back over to you. I've talked probably too much. This is what happens.
Wonderful, Jade. Thank you so much. This was such an informative presentation and such wonderful treasures to be found in our collection. So thank you for taking good care of them. And we'll have some time, a little bit of time now for some questions. If you have any questions, please remember to use the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many as we can as time allows. We do have one to kick off with, Jade. As you described some of the challenges that the collection faces just within the design center. If you could envision the future of the collection, what do you see, and are there any plans in the future that you'd like to share?
Oh, well, we love working in our space. I mean, it's just, you know, this beautiful mid-century building, but it needs a lot of TLC. And so, you know, maybe this is complete speculation, you know, maybe there's some pairings with our wonderful architecture department where students can come in and, you know, study the building and maybe work on a plan for how to preserve it, because it's a, you know, important holder of stories and memories as much as the objects that are held in it. You know, there's a bunch of things on our wish list, but I think we're doing a pretty good job getting our collection out there to our students and faculty and sharing it with them. And we're always, you know, welcoming people across the street. That last slide, which I showed just very briefly, shows you how you can take a look at what we hold online, like a repository. And more of that is becoming available to the public. So that's been a big thing we've been pushing for, is getting this collection out there, not just to our community, but the sort of like larger public community interested in these things as well.
Excellent, wonderful. To piggyback on that, we do have a question asking, you know, what have been some of the major changes and improvements that have been made since you joined the university and started working with the collection?
Oh, so, I mean, so the collection itself is part of the Gutman Library's Special Collections Division, right? Sort of that, it lives under that realm. And so I've always I've had such great support from the library, and we've made leaps and bounds forward in terms of like what we've been able to do in terms of, again, digitizing, photographing, inventorying, the helpfulness that they provide, and the ability they help, you know, they help us advocate for ourselves to the larger university. And I think is, you know, sort of like our presence, people knowing about us on campus increases. We just see more doors opening up. So it's been really encouraging. Before I got there, and I mentioned early on in my presentation, I've been there 4 years now. There was a curator before me, but there was a period of time where the collection was just kind of there, and nobody quite knew what to do with it at that point. So it's really become, I think, an important, I hope, an important piece in curriculum for faculty and also research and inspiration for students.
Wonderful. Excellent. We have a few questions wondering where would the average person find resources such as unbuffered tissue paper and archival boxes that might be big enough for, say, a wedding dress?
Fantastic question. So we kind of rely on two main sources for those materials. And I'm really glad you asked that question because I know it's not something I had in my presentation. So there's a company called University Products and Gaylord Archival, and they both have wonderful web presence. They have people that will chat with you about any questions you might have, and actually on their sites they have, they would have, if you forget, oh, am I supposed to use buffered, am I supposed to use unbuffered, they've got a little helpful hints. Use this if you've got this. If you want to use both, use unbuffered. So those are some really good places. But interestingly, I was looking to prepare for this presentation, and I found that the Container Store has archival boxes. There are a lot out there. So as long as it says archival, it's usually that bluish kind of grayish color. That there are a lot of places to get it. And then in terms of information, like maybe if you want a little bit more information about anything that I've said, again, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, there are a lot of resources out there about how to properly care for your textiles.
Well, the Container Store is a wonder for all of us. Jade, a few folks are wondering about your team of students and if you have any additional staff, and if you ever have occasions when you could use volunteers.
Yes, so the staff at the Textile and Costume Collection is myself and the wonderful Ann Wilson, who I know is listening. So hello, Ann, thank you. She's just sort of like my right-hand lady who I couldn't do without. And then we are joined by a graduate assistant and usually about 3 work-study students. And they have done so much to help us kick that place into shape. And yes, in answer to your question about volunteers, if you're interested in potentially volunteering, get your name on that contact list that was up on that last slide. And we're hoping in the future, we've still got a lot of hangers to make. And so we're hoping to have another hanger making hangout, and we'll hopefully have more events like that. We also have, and we'll see what the fall brings, in-person, like sort of talks and lectures. So again, that sort of email list that you can get on will help you stay in contact with. And then of course, always feel free to email me as well.
That's excellent, because we do have some questions from folks who are asking if any exhibitions are held on campus of some of the pieces, or if any of them ever travel. Have we considered, or have we partnered with museums to travel some exhibits?
Yeah, so I do an exhibition that incorporates both the collection and my students' work. So it's usually displayed in the Gutman Library, and that's usually in the spring. It didn't happen this spring, but we're hoping that it's going to happen belatedly in the fall. And we actually have partnered with a number of museums, both in the Philadelphia area and beyond. We've got a piece actually right now up at the Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York City for their big exhibition that's been sort of extended about Willie Smith, a designer who has roots in Philadelphia. So we like to partner with other institutions, because in our building, it's not the best place for exhibitions. It's really our workspace. So we're always on the lookout.
I think we have time for one more question. That we do have many that are coming in, but those of our alumni and our attendees who are garment makers, textile creators, do you have any tips for them on how to create textiles that will stand up to time?
Oh.
Stand up to time.
Oh, that's quite a question. You know, what's really fantastic, I think, about people who work in museums is that they're adept at sort of rolling with the punches. Like, you give us something, we'll figure out how to store it. You know, we have to figure out how to store purses and fans and parasols and all sorts of different textiles. So we're up for the challenge, like, you know, design to your heart's content, whatever strikes you and strikes your fancy, and we'll figure out how to make it last and to get people seeing it for the generations to come.
Excellent. And thank you so much for that work, the important work that you and your team and your students are doing to preserve history. And Jade, thank you again for your time this evening. I know that we didn't get to everyone's questions, and if you want to share them, I'm sure that you can send them directly to Jade, or if you want to send them to the alumni office, we'll be sure that we share them with her as email us at alumni@jefferson.edu. And some folks were asking if a recording of this talk will be available, and you should receive a link tomorrow to the Jefferson Alumni YouTube channel where you can view a recording of tonight's presentation and rewatch and get those important details from there. We encourage all of you to join us for some of our other upcoming alumni events and webinars, including next week's talk on sustainable homesteading, where we'll provide some tips and tricks for growing your own fruits, vegetables, or herbs, no matter what your garden may look like. So we hope that you'll sign up at jefferson.edu/alumni events for that event and for many of our other programs. We also encourage you to consider supporting the Jefferson's COVID-19 Better Together Fund. You can do that at jefferson.edu/COVID funding. This special funding has been established to provide support for the entire Jefferson community of students and employees to help them adapt to the ever-changing circumstances that the COVID-19 pandemic has presented. We thank you all once again for joining us and participating in tonight's talk. I hope you stay safe and stay well. See you soon.